Good evening and welcome to Ways of Seeing with me, Kirsten Davies. I am a photographer based in Sheffield. I've been a photographer for 10 years now and really love what I do. And I really enjoy sharing that passion with other people. It's one of those creative things where it's accessible to everyone. Anyone with a camera can learn to take better photos. And I'm really passionate about capturing moments to help you remember the little things in life as well as the big things. And yeah, I'm hoping that today you will take at least one thing away to help you improve your photography. I think everybody's got something to bring to photography because everybody sees the world slightly differently, which is just wonderful. We always think that everybody sees it the way we do. And the more I meet people and speak to them, the more I realize that we see the world very differently. And that's really exciting. So I hope that by the end of this, you will have learned at least one thing. And yeah, so the way I'm going to run it is just going through a few of my photos. We're breaking it down into a few subjects. We've got the rule of thirds, framing, cropping, perspective, and then a few other bits at the end. And yeah, hopefully you will come away with something really valuable. So to start us off, we will look at the rule of thirds, which is kind of self-explanatory. It's about composition and about how you break up your frame and how you position things, where your subject is. So quite often I will put the subject of my photo slightly off center on the third. Not always. Sometimes I put it bang in the center, but we'll come to that later. For example, this particular photo on the rule of thirds slide is divided up into thirds, not only horizontally but also vertically, where you've got the sky, the sea, and the land, and then obviously going this way you've got the grass, the people, and then some more grass. And yeah, I mean, on a side note, I've also used the grass in the foreground to provide a bit of a framing. So we'll come on to that with framing later. But yeah, it just creates a bit of a frame for the image. So on to the next slide. This is a really simple image. And as you can see, it's a little bit of lavender. It was just outside my front door, and I just thought it looked really, really pretty. And I love macro photography, which is taking photos of smaller things at life size, so 1:1. So I've got a special macro lens for that I take it with. And yeah, what's been really nice is there was a really clean background. Now it just wouldn't have looked quite right if it was on center. So just putting it slightly off center really draws the eye to it. And then with a clear background, it really helps enhance the colors. And yeah, it just really brought it to life, which I really liked. This one was taken in France. It was a beautiful chateau. And as you can see, it's horizontal thirds with the sky, the castle, and the water. Very basic, but yeah, it just really works. I think if you have too much water or too much sky, it can just doesn't sit right. You just know something's not quite right. So just getting that balance of the 33.3, 33.3, 33.3 just really brings it all together. Now here's an example where I have put the subject in the middle, but it works in this instance because it's balanced out with the windows on either side. So you've got the door and the person in the middle, but it's symmetrical with the windows on either side. So yeah, it's still got the vertical thirds, which is again quite pleasing, even with the subject in the middle. And here's another example where it's almost on the diagonal, not quite, but again, breaking down the image. And again, even though I've said, put your subject on the third, sometimes it does work with your subject being slap bang in the middle, as this kind of shows, which is really great. So that's a quick rule of thirds. On to framing. I really love framing. I love using depth of field as well to create framing. So just a little aside on technical details. Depth of field is how much of the photo is in focus. So a shallow depth of field is when just a little bit is in focus. So for example, this particular image has a shallow depth of field where what I've been shooting through is really blurred, but in the distance, what I've focused on is pin sharp. And I really like that juxtaposition between the blurred and the sharpness. It really helps bring your subject into focus. Now, you don't always have the ability to change your depth of field, which is done through aperture. So don't worry too much if you don't know anything about aperture, don't worry about it. You can still do some great framing even without that technical knowledge. But for those of you that do have DSLRs or anything that you can change the aperture, if you shoot wide open, which means a low value f-stop, so f2.8, f1.4, you're going to get a shallow depth of field. But again, if you're just on your phone, don't worry about that. So here's an example of a subject that was really interesting. I just saw this leaf on my friend's table and I was really drawn to it because of the colours. I love autumn. I took this photo, but it just didn't quite sit right. And I wanted to create a better image. So I think it's really important to try and work your subject, so to speak. So for this one, it took some time, but I just changed my position, changed my angle, and used the chair to frame the leaf. I didn't change anything else. I didn't move the leaf. It was just there, and I really liked it. And as you can see, it's kind of got it's on the third in a diagonal, and the leaf is sharply in focus with the blurred out chair, which really works. And I really like this image. And what's really lovely is it's something so simple, and yet it brings back memories of my friend's garden and getting to hang out with her, which is really cool. So here's another example of framing, again on the diagonal with a mirror, and just kind of putting everything off center, but using the edge of the mirror to frame things a little bit, and again create that blurred look with the subject in focus. So here's a really good example. So some photography friends and I did a little headshots shoot with all of us taking photos of each other. And I think this really illustrates how to frame things well. So a lot of people would probably, on the first photo, take something like that, maybe the person looking at the camera. But actually being able to use the ivy to frame the person and just going to the side and taking that second photo, it just makes things pop, doesn't it? It separates the subject from the ivy because the subject's in focus. I suspect even if you did this with a camera phone, you should get a bit of blurring. If the ivy is very close to your camera phone lens and the subject is a bit further away, you should still get that slightly blurred ivy with your subject in focus. Which is really exciting. And yeah, as you can see, there's also a great contrast with colour, with the green and the red. That's something you can throw in there every now and again, thinking about colour. But for now, just think about framing if it's a bit too much. So here's the next one, which is using the architecture to frame the subject. And it's just done really well. It's not only using the architecture, but also shadow and light. So there's kind of two things going on here. And even though there is a lot going on with the layers, it really works. And possibly why it works so well in black and white is that you do have that light and the dark and the architecture that really makes it quite a strong image. So you could also think about how you can use architecture to frame your images. That's a brief overview on framing. Now, cropping, deciding what to leave in and what to leave out. This is probably one of the most important things of being a photographer, choosing what you leave in and what you leave out. I love this. I think it can really help focus on something particular that you want the viewer to see. And yeah, it can tell a story, a different story from the one that you might naturally be telling if, say, for example, in this picture, the person's face was visible. So let's go through a few pictures. So this one, I was taking it, this was in Muscat, and I really loved the ripples on the sand. The light hitting the wet sand, just everything about it was just really exciting. And I took this one and I knew it just wasn't quite right. I've put in too much sand and it was just not right. So again, I worked at it and kind of put in a little bit more sky, a little less sand. And as you can see, it's kind of breaking the rule of thirds, because the sea, the way I am laying, there's not much sea, is there? So it's almost like straight down the middle, and you've got a half at the top, half at the bottom. But somehow it works, and I really liked it. So yeah, that's how you choose what to include. I had too much sand in the first one, needed to put less sand in, more sky, and created this. So here's one of people. I love photographing people, and I think sometimes we can think, oh, the whole person needs to be in it. But I really love kind of cropping heads off and hands and whatnot. And for me, the most important thing about this particular image was that the little boy was the main focus of the photo. So it didn't matter if his mum wasn't completely in the frame. Obviously, it was really important to see her face, but in terms of having her whole head in and her hands, it wasn't as important. So I made the decision to kind of crop it a little bit tighter so that we could see a close-up of their faces. So that's kind of what I'm thinking when I'm doing portraits, that you don't always have to have everything in the frame. Whereas here's one where I definitely wanted everything in the frame. I wanted the symmetry. This was taken at the Grand Mosque in Muscat, and the designs are just beautiful, and the symmetry is beautiful, and I wanted to include that. So that is why my subject is in the middle, and I wanted to include the whole pattern. So yeah, it's a choice. Sometimes you want to crop, sometimes you want to leave a lot in. For example, this one, I wanted a little bit more in because it tells a story. If I cropped that too close, it would be hard to see what it was really about. To have that background in, even though it's blurry, you can tell that she's in a gym. Whereas if you'd cropped it too tightly, you probably wouldn't. You might have realised she was in a gym, but it might not have been as obvious. So I really wanted that kind of that imagery so that people could understand where the photo is taken. And it might still bring up questions, what's a dog doing in a gym? But at the same time, it tells a story. It's only a little snippet of a story, but it provides a bit of interest. So here is an example of kind of cropping a lot of detail out. It'd be very easy to try and take a photo of this magnificent light, the whole of it. But actually then sometimes you lose the detail. Whereas creating this image, I wanted people to be able to see every bit of it without losing yourself in the detail. And so having a little bit of the main light with the dome and all the decor really means you can kind of you can travel from the top of the image through to the outer bit of the image. And I really liked it. I did still take some of the whole lamp, but I must admit, this is one of my more favourite images. Right, perspective. Now this is when it really gets exciting. I really love perspective because this is when you can really bring in your own eye to help you show the world how you see things. So this particular image, my husband and I went for high tea at a lovely hotel, and all the cakes and stuff were served on really shiny black tiered cake stands. And I noticed that my husband's reflection was in the cake stand, and so I had to take this photo. Now, without that background, I don't know how you would see it without knowing that, but I really love it. It's a great memory of a wonderful day, but it's something quite unusual. So let's delve in. Here's our Christmas dinner from a few years ago, and I think most people would often see something and take a photo standing exactly where they are. What I would love to challenge you to do is to get high, get low, change your position, and see how you view things from a different perspective. For example, taking another photo of the same scene, lower down. So obviously I lowered myself to the level of the table and took this. Well, to me, that is a lot more provocative and more tasty looking than the previous one. So obviously that is a true reflection of what it looks like. But somehow when you flick to that, it provokes an emotion. And you can just see more of the food, you can see more of the decor, it tells more of a story. I think the previous one is very busy, you can't really see the detail, you're maybe distracted by the background with all the bits of, the radiator, the towel on the radiator, everyday life things, but we don't necessarily want them in. Whereas that just really says Christmas dinner. Another example is this, again, taken straight on, which is fine, and it does show what it looked like. But if you just go to the side a little bit, and again, using cropping skills, not including everything, but just looking at a few details, you can create a totally different image that has more of an emotional impact than the first image. That feels very cynical in a way, dare I say it, whereas that feels a bit more creative. So another thing I said, get high, which means physically. Get high, get up on something, or in this case, for this particular photo, I put the rose on the floor so I could stand above it and get the photo looking down. The light was particularly lovely that day, and it created quite a contrast with the petals, which I also liked. I love photographing children from above. They're obviously on the ground a lot more than we are, and getting them to look up is just really great because you really get a sense of what they're doing because you've got all their toys around, as this little boy's doing, and it just looks really, really lovely. Obviously, the hardest thing is trying to get kids in focus because they move so fast. So you've got to be quick. The other thing with kids is they're obviously a lot smaller than us. And so if you're not taking a photo from above, actually getting down on their level is really great to kind of see the world the way they see it. And that's what I did here. I used a little bit of framing. I used the door as a bit of a frame, which is the blurred out bit on the left. And it just, I just really love this photo because it's just an everyday occurrence captured in a way that's really exciting. So if you're photographing kids, really think about getting down to their level or getting up high and looking down. That could be really cool. So this is getting really low. I always encourage people to get on their tummies because you never know what you'll see when you're down that low. The light was just really incredible. I think it was afternoon light, and I'd just been going for a walk and saw these beautiful flowers and thought, I've got to photograph them. And so I really did get onto my tummy. It can be a bit tricky sometimes. Maybe take a blanket if you're worried about your clothes, but you can really capture some beautiful images. Here's my friend doing just that. And she got some great photos with her iPhone. So you don't always need a fancy camera to get some great photos. Right, this is just an example of how low I will go for a photo, oblivious of everybody around me. So perspective is everything, and it just gives a different view on things. Here's just another example of getting down to a level that maybe people don't normally see. That I had to wait for a little bit for the bird to actually launch, and you have to be quick. But just another one. This is a great example. You can get high, you can get low, but you can also get really up close. And this is again in the Grand Mosque. I mean, the detailing, it was just so exciting, all the decor. You just couldn't quite capture it all. But this was one way where I just got right up to this particular wooden bit of sculpture and took my camera straight up to try and capture a bit of the detail in a different way. So that's another thing you can think about is where you position yourself in relation to whatever you're photographing. And that was getting really up close and personal. So this one, this is my cousin's little boy, and he was having great fun in the hammock. And I really like shooting landscape rather than portrait. However, with this particular one, it just wasn't quite working. It's a lovely photo and it's a great memory, but I knew that I could maybe get something a little bit different. So I turned my camera to get it into portrait mode and got this, which is so much more exciting. The light was better. Again, I've used the hammock to frame him. And yeah, I just really love it. So think about whether you're going to use landscape or portrait for your images. Like I said, I prefer landscape, but there are those moments where portrait really does work. But it's personal preference. I mean, maybe you're someone that really likes shooting in portrait, and that's totally fine. So quality versus quantity. I think I remember hearing something about 10,000 hours of practice makes you an expert at something. And with photography, you can take a lot of photos, but are they any good? Well, I reckon that the more photos you take, the more practice you have, the better your work will become. And for me, I think what's really helped me is doing little projects. So I undertook a 365 project. The first one I did was probably back in 2014. And it really, really helped me think about things and develop my skills. This was my first 365 project. On the ones on the left is the first photo I took of that 365 project. A whole year later, or just shy of a year later, on my final image, I went back and the bike was still there, and I took the second image. And I could really see how my photography had improved just because I had taken a lot of photos. I'm obviously not just taking one a day, I'm taking a good few a day and then choosing the best one to post. So if you ever are really wanting to push yourself, really challenge yourself, you could do a 365 project. You could also do something a little less intense, maybe a 52 project where you take one a week. But I really enjoyed it, and I've done it a few times again since because I really, really loved the process. But at the end of the day, there are always rules to break. So don't feel confined. Just because I've told you about the rule of thirds doesn't mean you have to follow that all the time. I think in my first year when I was doing photography, I took a photo that broke all the rules and I really loved it. I couldn't tell you why. There was no subject, there was no thirds, there was nothing. This was the image. And yeah, I just really loved it. So the thing is, if you take a photo that breaks all the rules and you really love it, that makes it an excellent photo. And yeah, you shouldn't be afraid to try different things and not always stick to the rules. So from my perspective, photography is about having fun and being creative. It shouldn't be a chore, it should be a joy. And there is so much to learn, but at the same time, you can still take great photos just where you're at. So I would like to challenge you guys watching, if you choose to accept it. I've done a few little challenges for you to choose one or do all of them, or create your own challenge if you prefer. So here we go. There's take a non-traditional portrait. This could be, for example, using a different perspective or framing in a unique way. The photo I've used just next to that particular one is just using a slow shutter speed. Again, you may not be able to do that on the camera you're using, but if you are able to, that's kind of a fun way to do a portrait. You could photograph an everyday item. I really love this. I love taking something ordinary and creating an image that is really fun and exciting, whether it's using colour or cropping or whatever to create an image that's quite different. I especially like it when you've taken a real close-up and you don't quite know what the image is, what the item is that you photographed. So that could be a challenge you would enjoy doing. And like I said, getting high up safely or getting low. Practice photographing your subject from a different vantage point. And like I've said, don't be afraid to get on your tummy to get a great shot. It's amazing when you change your perspective, even if it's just getting on your knees or just bending down a little bit. It's amazing what you can see. So that's a little whirlwind tour of just a few things you could think about to help enhance your photography. The thing I could encourage you to do the most is just get out there and take photos. Now, I'm willing to give some feedback. I'd love to see your photos. I think one of the highlights for me at Devoted last year when I ran this workshop was sending people out on their little challenges, but getting to see the photos they took when they came back. And that was really exciting. And there were some really, really great ones because the Devoted campsite, well, there's lots to photograph, but you've really got to be imaginative to create some different images. And I was really impressed with what people had produced. So if you'd like to take part, please feel free to email me. My email address is there. I have no idea how many people are watching or how many people will take me up on this offer. So please bear with me if you need to wait a little bit for a reply. But hopefully a few of you would enjoy doing that. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, I hope you have fun trying new things with your camera, and hopefully next year we'll get to do this face to face. I hope you have a really good evening. If you have any questions, please do feel free to email me. I'll do my very best to get back to you very quickly. Take care and goodbye.